Hello there folks, this is Ferengi on board here, this time with a video on a topic which I would like to discuss a bit on. I don't know how much I will extend this, but the topic of today is gravity. Ever since I was young, I was told that gravity is the end or one of the ends of human potential, because for so long time humanity was faced with the question, what is gravity? And like for so long, if you wanted to shut down a researcher's mouth, you could simply ask them what gravity is, and it was one of the easiest questions to ask. But it's one of those situations in which, well, apparently no one could find an answer. Now the point is, why it would be hard to find an answer to what gravity is. Well, because we can actually see that gravity, throughout what we believe to be our history, or probably what it truly was, gravity has been something that we completely disregarded. When we were all about, illiteracy, and especially in Europe and America, there weren't too many sources of inspiration. The point was, literally everyone kind of immediately identified themselves with their own bodies, and being stuck on this earth is like not having the capacity to uh, leave this earth and fly like other things. This thing, like it wasn't something that most people would actually think of. I mean, surely everyone would have the curiosity to ask themselves, how would it feel to like be able to have some wings and fly like the angels, or, well, let's say more like birds, or anything similar to that. The point is, well, no one actually thought about any principle that would say, hey, you know what, there is something that actually keeps us here, okay? And I'm sure only in the most enlightened areas of the world there were some principles about what gravity might have been. Now with science, and ever since it started spreading all sorts of beliefs, and, well, some of them may actually be true, the point with science is that this force actually was slowly taken into account, because people started wondering why when you drop something it actually falls, okay, and why doesn't it just stay where it actually is, okay? So there is definitely something that pulls things down. According to science and more like history, this was taken more into account when people started wondering why there was this guy leaning by a tree, and suddenly an apple fell on their head, and it's like they started wondering what actually makes that um, that apple fall. And the question is, well, let's think about this in a way. It's like most likely that person went home and they started debating and writing all sorts of stuff that the minds they had, and the environment and the possibilities back then allowed them to. Well, they created some stuff and came up with some possible ideas. Those ideas most likely were taken by others who found them very important, okay? So don't judge these people back then, because their perceptions were different than ours, and their possibilities were somewhat different. Now, well, the difference is we have access to a lot more knowledge, but the question is, well, most of that knowledge can be questionable in a way. So I don't know if we're not actually in the same situation, is that circumstances give us the impression that we are somewhat different. Okay, so it was agreed, more like a common acceptance that gravity is just something that pulls things. Okay, but ain't love, for example, something that pulls things together in a way? Like when you see people that they theoretically love one another, okay, it's a sort of gravity. It pulls them closer, okay? And even if that love is fake, okay, it's nothing else than the effect of parasites who have finally found some incompatible humans that they will force into submission to spend their whole lives together, so that they would in the end ruin the other person's lives and their own lives as much as possible. Like we can actually see so often so much of this with marriages nowadays, because marriage is nothing else than, a kind of ritual that forces people subconsciously to stay together. Okay, that it's much more than just some words spoken, because words have power. The point about gravity, it was like for a long time it was only a commonly accepted thing, that it's a force that, well, keeps things, people, and like literally everything, let's call it more like glued to the surface, and it's bound to keep you there. Okay, because no one could actually prove back then, and well, no one can actually prove nowadays what gravity is. But there have been these theories about gravitons and the particles of gravity. It's like, dude, couldn't you invent something like more palpable? It's like, why do you think that everything must have a kind of particle? And there's also these ideas of the particle of God, and everything like this. It's like, dude, whenever you can't find something that's palpable for the people, there's always this idea of gods that has to appear, because it's just like advertisements. If people don't believe it, make it flashier. Okay, or if people don't believe it, make them more convincing. And a little principle of manipulation says that, well, if people don't believe you, at least come up with some sources, even if they're not necessarily true. But when you say, my father taught me, okay, in front of children, and you're also one of the children, okay, they will be more inclined to believe you, because you're presenting a greater source, okay, someone who's older. Okay, and it's not necessary that in this case your father might be much brighter, but they are more of an authority because they are older. And it's all about people's beliefs. It's not about science, it's not about literally anything. Okay, because science may be 100% fake, more or less. Okay, let's make this as a presupposition, but it matters more what people believe. Just like after a war, okay, um, a nation ravaged by war, okay, is finally now at peace. But it's enough to accidentally start, or like on purpose, start the alarms again, and the people who still live in shock of that war, they will instantly create all possible ideas, okay, all possible um, well, things that can actually happen. The enemy is again in their own minds, but you're just sounding some alarms. Okay, so it's enough to sound those alarms again, and you definitely have all sorts of thousands of possibilities, right, happening, going on people's minds. They will still follow that same instinct of looking for shelter, but there is no enemy coming except the one in their minds. Okay, so expectation is a very powerful tool to use against most people. And of course, when you combine illiteracy with expectation, you get a deadly weapon. Because when we explain science in simple terms, okay, how I call it, for simpletons, the point is you're actually doing nothing else than feeding their expectations. Okay, because you can't actually explain to simple people what gravity is, even if you, let's say, find out what it truly is. Okay, you can't start explaining to simple people the laws of gravity that in the end we kind of have created. And we created maths, and we started using those numbers. Okay, and there are indeed some magic aspects to it. Okay, but magic and mathematics, they are something closely related, even if you might not accept this, and they are highly universal. Okay, so what we have created was already existent. We just gave that more more specialized meaning. Okay, because we were talking about geometry and such, but this thing was known by some of the wiser nations, okay, like India and such, and the Chinese people. They were known like for so long. I mean, there were so many things done in sacred geometry, which is the perfect way of construction, and that is why those things actually still live, because that sacred geometry makes them perfect in the face of literally any like literally any or most of the um, effects of nature. Like, take for example the pyramids. They might have been built with some alien sort of technology, but that is basically stone. It's stone from this planet, but it is built in such a way. And don't forget, buildings are also alive. And a building is and will be represented also by the aura and the emotions and the vibration of anyone like more vibrantly living there, because living and the idea of life is existence through everything, because that building is nothing else than a conglomerate of living beings. Okay, those electrons, okay, and those particles in there, they're all alive, they are moving, they have their own vibration, and vibration equals life. Science tells you that, well, it's like life must be biological, and it must actually also follow the principle of a metabolism. Okay, so they say that viruses are dead, but how come something that is dead can actually enter your body and more likely end you up more dead than they are presupposed to be? It's like, dude, just because life has so many different ways and your mind cannot perceive them, don't try to poison my own mind, because it simply won't work. Because what you're doing is you're trying to put some limiting beliefs. What I perceive in those ideas is that you can't understand something better, so you'd force me to also accept your primitive beliefs. I don't need your science to prove me things, because I can actually, find so many of the answers within me. The truth is within us, and we all came to experience it. Now, of course, externalizing and seeking things outside is also a way of experiencing. So don't take it wrong if you accept external truths. Okay, it's still a way of experiencing, and well, life is kind of too short to actually fight and constantly debate over things. But the higher you get your awareness in time, you'll actually understand that certain things for some reason don't click with you. And truth is something relative, although for some reason science wants to make it as, a universal one. Okay, there is no such thing as a universal truth. Now, on a certain planet, there are what can be called a global, how I would call it, okay, because it's a globe, okay, it's a global aspect, but it's not universal, because people have forgotten that universal actually means universe related. Even if you have, let's say, one of the simplest things, that water boils at a certain temperature, okay, that's global. Okay, like it most likely will act the same anywhere on this planet, but you don't have that same value, okay, on other planets. Who knows, maybe other planets don't simply have water and they have something else, like imagine silicate based life forms, okay, or I don't know, could there be like a uranium based life forms? Well, science will most likely say, well, it can't, because uranium is very volatile, and it's actually proven, and it's kind of true that if you have a higher concentration that you should, it actually can explode, or most likely will explode. And well, that's why the containers are made in special ways to ensure that it is not shaked too much, because it also is unstable enough to explode if you shake it a lot. Okay, now the point about that is, well, yes, but come again, that uranium is global. Okay, it will follow those rules on this planet, because everything that ends up on a planet is bound into submission of some rules. Okay, water on this planet is bound to submit to certain rules. It is one of the most lively entities that you will find in space, and in space it will have a different mechanic, and on other planets it might have a different mechanic. Who knows, in other worlds, like water might be the opposite of life in a way. Just like on our planet, it can be both a bearer of life and a taker of life. What if in other worlds, water can only be a taker of life, right? But come again, it's all about imagination and the such, because literally everything that we imagine comes from a source of inspiration, okay, from a divine source of creation. And considering that this galaxy of ours, scientifically speaking, has billions of stars, the question is, like, billions of stars mean, let's say, 3 times more planets, okay? And that would be very narcissistic, okay, of us to believe that we are the only living beings in here. We are not the only living beings, okay, as humans, because hey, we have animals on our planet, okay, like there are other life forms than us humans. How can you simply even think about a question that we are the only ones in this universe? Because hey, we also have animals on our planet. When the question is asked, it's like, dude, are you forgetting that we have animals? And besides that, even trees are alive, okay? Even the objects that we use are alive because they have been made from components. Basically, those components are like the cells in our own body. Like when you create a building, you put a brick over another brick, okay? Or you use much more refined and better components, but those are still a piece put over another piece. It's like you're creating the organ structures, okay, and you're creating the backbones, okay, and you're also creating the cells of that body, okay. Even computers are also alive because why wouldn't they, okay? Like they sleep, okay. When you turn them off, they sleep, but they have a battery within them that still keeps them somewhat alive, okay. There is something within them that keeps all that information active, because the moment that battery goes off, all the memory is volatile. Just like with us, when the spark of existence simply turns off, okay, and the consciousness leaves the body, the point is very simple. The memory within the mind, okay, everything within the mind is volatile and will just fade. Everything is somewhat fading anyways, okay, because if something is not achieved, it will seek to re-become pure, and through re-becoming pure, it will just keep fading, just like black holes fade. They dissipate as well. There are a lot of principles to it, but we cannot necessarily say that everything is false, okay? So now we have all these ideas that come with the particle of God, and the graviton, which is the particle of gravity, and it's like I'm actually curious to see what expressions they bring, like what like juicy calculations they will put into people's minds to like fight for and accept. It's like, why can't you simply accept the point that gravity is nothing, okay? Like literally gravity is just nothing. It is pure energy manifesting, okay, just like love. There is also no such thing as a lovely pull, okay? When you are pulled one to another, it's just another cord, or two consciousnesses, let's call it on the principle of this universe, gravitating one to another, okay? It's a tendency of things to reunite themselves, and well, that's kind of what matter is, compacted energy. And that's what in a way love also is. It is a way of manifestations coming closer together. It is an idea of consciousnesses gravitating more like towards the grand consciousness, the mother of consciousness, the force that made all these possible. And the reason, well, why would we actually focus on that? Okay, life is too short to spend time wondering how higher forces actually work. Most likely we will get some glimpses of those. Probably in later lives we may experience part and more of that, but well, let's focus more on this current life. Okay, the point of gravity is, well, it is a principle of evolution, as I call it, because everything, let's say in between inverted commas, gravitates towards a greater level of existence. Everything seeks to develop, just like minds will sooner or later meld into a so-called hive mind, and we kind of are a hive mind more or less, and it will develop sooner or later into a so-called gestalt consciousness, which is a consciousness in which the individuals are more interconnected. They no longer necessarily need physical cooperation, like body-based communication. They're more like telepathic or something like that, and they form societies in which everyone being interconnected, they also know they have an innate, like ever since birth, they have a certain purpose, and this consciousness will develop more and more, okay? They will become more and more advanced. So it's like gravity seems to me to also be somewhat time bound. Also, time is another concept, because everything will gravitate, let's say, to a better aspect. In terms of physicality, I don't know exactly either how to define gravity, but my mind doesn't function on the principle of this necessity, this aggressive necessity to basically give everything a meaning, because the moment I give meaning to something, I limitate myself because I disregard all the other possibilities. When you name something in a certain way, you are simply denying all the possibilities of that, because why would I ever give interpretations? That's the simple point. Why would I give interpretations? Because I don't simply know how they will end up infecting me, because I'm not gonna do much else than infect my mind with a belief which I will also accept, and I will pass on to the others. Again, it's all part of the experiment of life, but come again, I can't simply accept that gravity is something, and it is rendered and used by particles, and these juicy ideas about if everything seems to fail, just put God in there and it no longer fails because people are that compliant. Okay, then this is something that kind of amuses me. Now, well, there are a lot of ideas, and I simply can't accept science. It's like in the scientific community, the greatest things, the great battle in between flat earthers is like there is something like flat earth, scientists, and there are a lot who believe that, but come again, that's still a kind of a belief. Now, there have been people who did like astral projections, and they saw that in a way we actually live inside a dome and the earth may be a bit flat, but pictures like this aren't necessarily true, because water just doesn't flow outside. That was something used against such a theory. So if you use something against a false theory, then it means that that false theory is not necessarily false. Like if someone comes up with a false thing, you prove it with terms and ideas from your own idea. Okay, you don't just make fun of that thing, because the moment you make fun of it, you kind of spill out some ideas that, hey, that might actually be true. Now, the earth might not necessarily be flat, okay, at this 3D level, but at a higher level it might actually be. And if you look attentively at the sky, you can actually see that the earth, the sun and moon are kind of strange in a way, because for some reason I've been sun gazing and I have this impression that the sun is much closer than we'd ever think, because the earth is said to be getting closer and further away from the sun as it gravitates around it, but when you look at the sky, the sun is like literally at any given moment of the year it is basically the same size. And if the earth would get at least a bit closer to the sun, you should at least be able to see some differences in height and such. And just looking at the moon in plain night, it just makes me believe that it's like this kind of fairy in the sky, or it's just something that it's not necessarily that big and it's like only 50 or 60 kilometers away. It's like, dude, it's just that close. And have you ever had that impression that when you look at the sky you see clouds behind the moon? And it actually happened to me to have this, I won't call it necessarily as an illusion, but it happened so many times that I could see clouds behind the sun and behind the moon. It was like those clouds were like going around it, okay, like even if they would bend. Now, I wouldn't call that an illusion of light, because the moon is not that bright, and when you get to see clouds behind the moon, that's when you start actually questioning things more and more. Okay, and of course there are a lot of people who will run away from such ideas, and I'm not gonna dismiss literally everything and say that everything is false, but come again, I came here to experience my own truths, and I will also share them as things for others to take and gorge on, not necessarily to believe blindly, because that's not something that I seek. Okay, I'm not interested in blind seekers. Okay, now if people end up doing that, well, everyone is free to do whatever they want. I'm here to experience my own truths and also share with people, but how they use that, well, that depends on each and every one in the end. Now, I'm gonna wrap this video up. I discussed about several things the way I wanted. There would be probably other things to speak, but I will leave those for other videos. I will focus more on making shorter and shorter videos, because I don't know how much time people will have to, like watch an hour long of ideas and, not necessarily be impressed. Like, I'm not looking to impress people, but I'm just looking to give, ideas on, that there are more ways of experiencing life and there are more ways to understand. Okay, I know that this is all an experience, an experiment, but everything has to have its own time. Okay, everything happens in divine order and nothing happens without the universe's approval. So people still being stuck in such beliefs is still part of the experiment. Everything that happens was allowed by the universe. So you simply have to understand that you don't have to fight against it. The moment something happens in your life, it was agreed by the universe to happen, because it's also something that most likely you chose at a higher level to experience. Now, this is something that I'll leave for another video. Don't forget, become more introspective. Stop questioning yourself that much necessarily in the sense of hating yourself. Question yourself more for and through self-discovery. And, as usual, take care. You are loved and appreciated. Ferenc Board signing out.